quick reminder, each episode could contain some game spoilers, so please listen or watch with discretion. And now, your hosts for the Gamer's Advocate, AMKomnenos, Banana, and Legion. Enjoy the show.
You did freeze there for a moment, but it looks fine.
So, no, that's just me. That's just me.
We'll just
It was right when you said sit still. Weird.
Preparing for an ambush. Yeah.
Well, welcome to another one of our episodes of the Gamer's Advocate. If you have 1,000 people in a room, or 1,000 gamers, I should say, and you might have 1,000 different opinions, but we like to cover games that we love, games that we hate, games that we love to hate, and games that we hate to love. So all these issues are important to us. But today, we're going to go over a game specifically that I don't think we know too much about, maybe. It's a little known game called Mass Effect, and specifically Mass Effect 1. So I know when Mass Effect 1 first came out, I didn't really play it right away. I had some other things going on, but I had played KOTOR, I had played Baldur's Gate, and so this whole narrative driven hero, I don't know, I had some reservations about it, but I went in because I said, well, I mean, how different could it be from the other things that they've done so far, including Jade Empire and whatnot? After Jade Empire, I was a little, I don't know, we'll see. But once I got into it, of course, it's been my favorite series. What I've really liked is how they've taken one game and they made it better in two. And in two, in my opinion, they actually made it better in three. But let's talk about Mass Effect 1. What's y'all's history with it? Start with Banana this time.
So I've played Mass Effect 1 more than any other in the series. I've probably played it close to 10 times at this point. And I played it on Xbox 360 the first time, which is when it was the original Mass Effect, and I bought the DLC, I played through everything. I think that was only my first playthrough, and then every playthrough after that has been the Legendary Edition remaster of it. But I'm a huge fan of the series overall. I think Mass Effect 1 kind of holds a special place in my heart just because it is the starting point for that series. And it's a little trickier to get multiple playthroughs of the other games if you want to set up the backstory from Mass Effect 1. So you'll probably do a complete playthrough from Mass Effect 1 all the way through the trilogy. And for that reason, I've played Mass Effect 1 more than any others, because I'll start that and then maybe not get around to finishing it.
Yeah, you have a tendency to start at the beginning often, like a lot over and over.
Yeah. I think it's an easy beginning to the series as well, because I don't think the game's actually that long. If you choose to ignore the undiscovered planets, the unexplored ideas, and you just do the main missions, how long would it be? 20 hours, maybe?
Maybe not even that.
Yeah,
maybe
I don't even think that.
In my head, I was thinking 15, but it felt too short. Maybe it's around there.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good estimate.
It's just not always easy to go back into it once you know where things are, to say, I'm just going to skip that part. I could go do that real quick. But yes, if you knew all the ones that needed to be done and whatnot, you could definitely shortcut quite a few places.
So I played Mass Effect 1 around when it came out. Now, I didn't realize at the time, but BioWare would have been one of my favorite studios. I just hadn't noticed. I loved Baldur's Gate 1 as a child. I loved the small amount of Baldur's Gate 2 that I played as a child. I loved Knights of the Old Republic 1 and 2. I just never really put together it was the same studio. I didn't realize that I was falling down this path. For me, the one studio I identified with was Square Enix or Squaresoft. So I was always looking forward to a Final Fantasy game based on the titles. I didn't realize this was the next in my burgeoning fandom of BioWare. Probably because it's a different IP. Baldur's Gate 1, Baldur's Gate 2, Baldur's Gate 3, you'll have me. If it's going to be Knights of the Old Republic, put the 3 on the end and I'll buy it instantly. Mass Effect, I stumbled across it more by chance than anything else. Played it very quickly after it came out. And I've got a bizarre memory of it. I can remember playing Mass Effect in a friend's house and playing the scene where you have to talk down Rex. I didn't know that friend at that time. We had lost contact about a year or two before Mass Effect came out, but I have this very distinct memory of us playing together. Isn't that weird? But I played that when it came out. I loved the game. Didn't play it again until Mass Effect 2 came out. And then I started off just before Mass Effect 2's release by playing Mass Effect 1 and then playing Mass Effect 2. And then I didn't play it again until Mass Effect 3 came out. Did the same thing. And since that point, similar to Banana, I've probably played it around 10 times. But I also don't necessarily have a tendency to start from the beginning. Sometimes I just want to play Mass Effect 3.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I want to really focus on Mass Effect 1, but I think the same way Com does. I prefer Mass Effect 3 for a number of different reasons. I think the storytelling's pretty concise. It doesn't try to like fill in too much details like Mass Effect 2 does with all these other little side things that are important, but I wouldn't say that they're story game relevant, as much as 3 does. Everything 3 does, including the DLCs, is all related to the end. So, very.
Despite the fact that we want to focus on Mass Effect 1 in this podcast, I would just like to ask, just so we have a sense of reference for everyone, just sort of briefly, where you rank the 3 main Mass Effect games in order. Just so we have an idea of where we're approaching this from.
Well, for me, a Mass Effect 3, and then 2, and then 1 is the tier system. But I wouldn't say that the difference between 1 and 2 is as large as the difference probably between 2 and 3. It's that much of a difference. I really think 3 is far and away the best combat simulator with the way they do the squad mechanics and how you apply the powers that you get and everything. So all as a total package, 3 is it. So when you go from 1 to 2, it's definitely an improvement, but I think that they're a little bit closer in how they really work. And even things outside of the squad mechanics, just the universe map, the galaxy map and things like that, and how you go to planets and whether or not you need the little mini games or not. All that's cleaned up in 3. It's pretty straightforward.
Okay. Banana?
I would probably agree with that. I think 3, 2, 1 in that order. But I think it's kind of the same way that you and I would probably talk about Final Fantasy games to say like, oh, this is my least favorite game. In that context, my least favorite Final Fantasy game is a game I would probably rate like 7 out of 10.
Yeah.
Like this is the low point in the series, and I think it's an above average game.
Yeah, I've very similar. Not quite the same as you both, but I would have 3 as my favorite, followed by 1, followed by 2. And again, this is by no means slating 2. This is just in reference to each other. All 3 of those games would score in the very arbitrary system within one's head. They would all score 8s and above out of 10.
Right. This is probably a rare scenario where we all agree. No.
Yeah, when does that happen?
But what I will say is that a lot of people, it would seem the vast majority, and if anybody who's watching or listening to the podcast, definitely give us your comments of what you prefer. But I think the mass consensus is saying Mass Effect 2. A lot of times that was their entry into the game and into the series, but also the amount of stories you get from it, the amount of content you get from it, the complexity of it is really engaging. And a lot of times when you go from 2 to 3 and that's all 3 can seem a little bit smaller in many ways. So to say, yeah, I have a lot more memories about Mass Effect 2, so therefore I like Mass Effect 2 better, I get that a lot. A lot of people have told me they prefer 2 over 3. So.
Oh, same. I always felt like I have mine in the wrong order. For me, it's 3, then 1, then 2. I feel a very common consensus is 2, then 1, then 3. And I can see an argument for you putting any of these games in any order. Mm-hmm. It has never been a critique from my side that one is drastically worse than the other. We're really talking just personal preference and arbitrary reasoning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would definitely say I think when you get to 2, 2 kind of represents the game that the studio wanted 1 to be, if that makes sense. Like I think Mass Effect 1 was the start of the series. They did the best that they could, but no one knew it was going to be a success. So there's a kind of temperance to what they were willing to try with that game. And then having the success of Mass Effect 1, they were able to kind of leverage that into being a bit more ambitious with 2, which is, I think, why you see 2 as kind of the most expansive game within the trilogy. And then 3 is very much the closure game of the series. So it kind of needs to be a little bit more focused
Yep.
in order to kind of satisfy its role within the trilogy. So I completely understand why people would have a more significant connection to Mass Effect 2, as it feels like that's the game they wanted to make with Mass Effect 1, but they didn't have the opportunity. And once they established Mass Effect 1 as a success, they were able to kind of explore the freedom they had a little bit more with Mass Effect 2 and expand the game to the point where there's just more going on, and it's all done like we've been saying, like the game itself, even the weakest one in the series for anybody's opinion, is still a great game. When you have just a great game, more content typically means a stronger connection.
Yeah, I think in Mass Effect 1, you get introduced to a lot of concepts early on, and none of them are going to make any sense. So there's this big encyclopedia that you have of the codex to reference all these things that you may have gone over, and it actually narrates it for you, which is pretty amazing.
The Asari were the first species to discover the Citadel. When the Solarians arrived, it was the Asari who proposed the establishment of the Citadel Council to maintain peace throughout the galaxy. Since then, the Asari have served as the mediators and centrists of the Council.
If you get a chance, just go back and listen to some of those, and it will tell you this is what we think the Reapers are. And it doesn't disclose it until you discover some of these things. So it only gives you the knowledge of what you really need. It doesn't really like spoil anything in advance. Like if you encounter the Turians or whatever, if you encounter the Solarians, it'll give you a whole long narrative of who they are. None of that stuff is a mystery if you really want to know more. But the interesting thing about 1, though, is that it does start off slow like that. It's trying to lay down a foundation of lore that if you have no idea who these people are, it can't assume that you're going to know who they are because you've played 2 and 3 after. It doesn't know you're going to do that. So it has to be slow deliberately. And so that slow storytelling element is very unique among the three games, Mass Effect 2 and 3 specifically. But it's really hard for me if somebody's going to stream, for instance, Mass Effect as a first playthrough, it's really hard for me to watch somebody do that, because the series is well beloved and well played by so many others that a lot of times, especially streamers who are doing it as a first playthrough, want to get some information. They need that information, but they're not going to get it because a lot of people are going to interject their 2 cents. And it's like, oh, you got to go do this. You got to take this person with you if you go do that. It's all lost. I really actually encourage people to play their first playthrough offline, and because there's so much, especially Mass Effect 1, it's just there's so much to take in that you will miss if you're being distracted.
I think that kind of highlights my personal kind of policy regarding first playthrough games on stream, because I don't do first playthroughs anymore. My first playthrough is almost always offline, unless it's not a story focused game.
Absolutely.
I want that experience to be mine, and I want it to be completely under my control. So I don't even want to take the risk of somebody spoiling something or trying to backseat and tell me what to do in this situation. I do my first time playthroughs off stream, and then if it's a game I enjoy, I'll probably stream it.
I am 100% in the same boat. Absolutely. The the effort that you are putting in while streaming to interact with your chat, to make sure that your video is still working, your sound is okay. You are unable to dedicate that time and that love to the game itself, and especially when you're getting into questions outside of the main narrative, trying to remember who character X was, trying to remember what their relationship with character J was, that can get a little bit overwhelming. So I'm in a very similar boat. And I think you're right with Mass Effect 1, where there's so much quiet storytelling going on as well. If you think back, And I may get this slightly wrong because I will cross over, but I believe you have a moment on the Citadel early in the game where you pass by the embassies, and I think you find the joint Volus and Elcor embassy, and that little
Mhm.
bit of storytelling there of their relationship to the other major powers, the Taurians, the Solarians, who would have their sole embassy and their seats on the council. Then you have these two races who are consigned to a corner office together, and what that says about their role in wider society within the game. And it's quiet storytelling, and if you're focused, you'll probably notice because it's pretty
Yeah.
in your face.
Right.
Mhm.
And it's a pretty interesting lore relevant detail.
Absolutely.
Because once, and again, I'm not, if you're going to watch a podcast about anything we say, and I have this as a cautionary little tag at the beginning of any video, there may be spoilers involved here, but I'm going to try to refrain from the major ones. But yeah, the Asari were the first to find the Citadel. And then shortly after was the Elcor. Not the Elcor. The Volus, sorry. The Volus. You got me saying it. So, but the Volus were there right after. I mean, like right after. And you would think that that time period that they had, that they would have established themselves in the galaxy, right? To be part of the council. And so the Volus ambassador is upset, and he's telling you right away, you may not, again, a lot of stuff is hitting you all at once, and they're very slow about telling you these things, but he's like, yeah, the humans are here. They're the most recent species to come in, and they're already being told that they might even get a seat on the council. We've been here. So he has kind of a right to be upset. Meanwhile, you have this Elcor who's like, be patient. Why are you so upset? And all this personality is being thrown at you, and it's just something that didn't have to be included.
That few hours on the Citadel together is some of the tightest storytelling that you will find. Using environmental details, seeing the, I think it's the Krogan statue, isn't it? You have the nightclub area. You've got, like you say, the embassies together. You've got that one Hanar who's protesting, I believe. No, they're proselytizing, not protesting, aren't they? And you just get a lot of personality and that tell you about the races involved without throwing the encyclopedia at you, even though that is there. And you can open it up if you like. That one Elcor who's telling the Volus to be patient, they are personifying their entire race in that one moment. And it's so memorable that when these are mentioned later, you have that point of reference and you realize who they are and what they're about.
I think that Mass Effect 1 is probably an incredible example as far as just how storytelling in any media kind of works. And this is my perspective as what I would consider kind of an outsider to the artistic community or like the creative community where storytelling is a practice skill. I think of storytelling as very difficult in the beginning and very difficult in the end. In the middle, it's a lot more freedom. But Mass Effect is a very, very good example of how difficult storytelling can be in the very beginning, especially if you're telling a story on an incredible scale. Um, Mass Effect is a complete universe. It's incredibly expansive. And in order for you to write a story set in a complete universe, you need to think out the complete universe. If you try to tell your player or your audience, whoever that is, whatever media you're using, the entirety of the context of the setting immediately on that scale, you're going to lose them. Nobody wants to just sit there and have somebody read out of an encyclopedia to them with no engagement. And Mass Effect does a really, really good job of presenting you with a universe you have no familiarity with, and you kind of piece it together at a pace that feels comfortable. And the reason I think that pace feels comfortable is because that pace is kind of set by the player. You're kind of introduced to Turians on the ship before you do kind of the tutorial sequence. You're introduced to the Alliance and the way human interaction is maintained in this time period. And then you kind of piece together what humanity is engaged in, what their effort is. And then you finally get to the Citadel. That's a ton of information to dump on a player in a very short period of time, but it's set up in a way that doesn't feel overwhelming. And then you get to the Citadel and there's even more information, and it's all available to you if you take the time to go through it. And that's another really challenging thing, is like, listen, we wrote a story that's set in this incredibly expansive world. If you don't know the world, the story's not gonna hit as hard. So we need you to understand the world. We also know that you don't want to just study. Like, you want to play a video game. And I think Mass Effect does a great job of maintaining it, that it's a game, but also educating you.
Well, they give you just that little balance. They give you enough of the world that you are essentially finding yourself in a place that you are familiarizing yourself with, but without getting really down into the nitty-gritty details. Because right now it doesn't matter who's in the Terminus systems.
Mhm.
And the history of the Asari really doesn't matter that much, and their role, the Protheans, they definitely mentioned in Mass Effect 1, and they take on a role. But right now, at this point, they don't really matter. They're just giving you that little bit of context that you need, so that all of those very, very human interaction feels like the wrong word, because it's Mass Effect, of course, with so many species. But all of those little human interactions, or human scale interactions that you do have, are put within the right context without overwhelming you.
I think if Mass Effect 1 had been written today, like brand new series out today, I hate to assume here, but I think a lot of writers would have started it at the Citadel. So that way you kind of like have all of them together. They're trying to mesh it all, but I don't think that would work, because doing it on your localized level, you as Shepard, the one you just got finished spending an hour or whatever in the character creator.
An hour? What are we, speed running?
Down by the river. What?
And then when it finally gives you the narrative, I mean, the little script that rolls up, I guess kind of like Star Wars or something, it tells you what's kind of going on. But that's not really what's going on. It just gives you a real brief introduction. But in the background, while Shepard's looking out the window, you have this conversation between Udina and Anderson. So they're deciding like who should maybe represent them going forward, if they were to have someone represent them. And that's where they start talking about Shepard in kind of like that third person. So you kind of get it's just a really interesting way to introduce the game. Because you don't know who Udina is. You have no idea who Anderson is. You just kind of get this impression like, oh, these higher ups are talking about us. And then when you actually start the game, as Com mentioned, you get to see certain unknowable details that become important later on. So when you're talking to Presley, he has a certain opinion about aliens. And that's common with humanity. Like, if you start talking to like a lot of the humans individually, there's a running theme there if you choose to pick up on it. Now, unfortunately, the second person we run into is that flies in the face of my comment is, of course, Jenkins, and and our practitioner on the our health practitioner on the Normandy. And they're not saying anything bad about aliens at all. But the question really was about specters. And he's more of interested in who specters are. So it quickly talks about what's relevant in the story pretty early on. But like I said, even if the first person you talk to is Presley, you start getting a strong indication of where humanity sits on the opinion bubble.
I think, yeah, Presley is another probably underappreciated character in that interaction that you have with them, because Presley does an excellent job of representing those legitimate concerns that are used to mask the less legitimate ones. Because Presley is very much concerned about having a Spectre on board, because Spectres are above the law. They don't answer to anyone except the council. And even then, do they? And that's a very real concern that everyone should at some point consider, like, is this really such a great idea? That, however, can be used to mask a much less legitimate concern, which is, do we want a Turian on the ship? And I think that is so accurately a representation of the way human beings interact, where they will use a legitimate concern to mask their own kind of bigotry. And in Presley's case, bigotry feels a bit strong, but it definitely, like, you do see those elements, and Presley even admits to it himself. If you play through Mass Effect 2, he admits that there are those biases that he had to confront himself about that played a role in the way he saw other characters in the game. But I think that is such a great job of storytelling that they've done to say, here's a character who is here's a character's yeah. I think the fact that I was speaking guarantees that the mic was going to pick up. But yeah, I think Presley does such a great job, and I think BioWare did such a great job of representing a very real person in that interaction with Presley. And it's brief, it's not tremendously important as far as the rest of the story goes, but they did a really, really good job of this tiny little element that maybe you won't even pick on in your first 2-3 playthroughs.
I think you hit this, and I can't remember if they address it in this moment. I think it might be lore that arrives later, but you do have this interesting idea where you have the concern of having this Turian on board, despite who that Turian actually is and how high ranked they are. But then you also have that the Normandy is I think it's a human-built ship with Turian sort of consultation and Turian aid. I don't think it's directly a co-project between them. So you do have that wonderful little detail if you pick it up, or maybe it's more of a second playthrough thing, where we're debating the merits of having a Turian on board a ship that wouldn't exist without Turian contributions.
Right. And I forgot to mention this part, but I think Banana said a couple things that reminded me that the introduction with the humanity and someone like Presley is great. I forgot the very first person you talk to is actually Joker.
I was going to say.
And so what way to really bring yourself into a game with a really lighthearted, a serious, everything's been serious up to this point. The box art is serious. The music is serious. The dramatic tone between Udina and Anderson. And then the first person you talk to is Joker, trying to lighten the mood.
Thrusters, check. Navigation, check. Internal emissions sync engaged. All systems online. Drift, just under 1,500K.
1,500 is good. Your captain will be pleased.
I hate that guy.
Nihilus gave you a compliment, so you hate him.
You remember to zip up your jumpsuit on the way out of the bathroom? That's good. I just jumped us halfway across the galaxy and hit a target the size of a pinhead, so that's incredible. Besides, Spectres are trouble. I don't like having them on board. Call me paranoid.
You're paranoid.
I wonder if there's a point to be made here as well about something we've briefly discussed before, and that's having Seth Green.
Yeah.
It's not Myers, it's Seth Green.
Seth Green.
Voice Joker, and how sort of displacing that can be, because he has quite a distinct voice. And you've probably heard him in Austin Powers in particular, or some of those movies, early 2000s, that when a game is trying to strike this tone of you being on this secret military mission, and it's going to get pretty dark pretty quick if we just think of Nihilus and how his story goes. To have the first thing you hear really be Seth Green's voice, that can be a bit discombobulating. And also, you have these established BioWare voice actors. And I don't know about you, but I was hearing, when playing Commander Shepard female, I was hearing, but I nearly said Batista. It's not Batista.
Bastila.
Bastila. Thank you, Batista. Oh, yeah, that would have been different. I'm hearing some Bastila in my main character, and how that can almost pull you out sometimes if the voice is too recognizable. Whereas Mark Meir, I hadn't really heard his voice before. So he was able to really sell me on him being Commander Shepard, whereas Jennifer Hill had to do a bit more hard work, which thankfully she's very capable of doing.
Yeah, she's also Mazzy in Baldur's Gate 2. Same voice.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, it is. And every single character, the voice actor that they have that's pretty famous, mean, I don't hear them when I hear them outside of Mass Effect, but for Mass Effect, that's uniquely unique to that person. And so if there was ever a Mass Effect movie, for instance, if Joker's not playing Joker, I mean, Seth Green's not playing Joker, I mean, why did we make this movie?
I mean, you say that. Keith David.
Keith David.
Distinct. When I hear his voice somewhere else, I'm so aware that it's Keith David, and to me, Anderson is always Keith David.
Yeah, and so if they got him to play Anderson, be all on board. Sure.
I feel like Keith David is an interesting one, though, because I think in the games where he's played a character, I mean, probably like 5 or 10 games into it, they were probably like, this guy plays a lot of characters. And then it became just an in-joke to write that into the game. Like, wow, this guy really sounds like 30 other people I've met.
I believe in Saints Row, he actually plays a character called Keith David.
Oh, he plays himself, and he also plays, I want to say, one of the villains in Saints Row 2. And so when you meet Keith David, I think in Saints Row 4, there is an in-joke where it's like, wow, you sound a lot like that guy from Saints Row 2.
But even as much as he's used, I would say within the series, Mass Effect 1, he's different in Mass Effect 2. Mass Effect 2, he's very different in Mass Effect 3. His tone, his patience, his way of delivering his lines in 3 is so dramatically different than 1 and 2. But they're all uniquely different when you have him, because in 1 he's very, matter of fact. He kind of pushes along the agenda. He says his lines fairly quick. In Mass Effect 2, he's more like, I don't really want to be here, but I'm here. And but in Mass Effect 3, he's much more, this is our situation. It's pretty dire.
I find there's a nice thing that you see there is you see his stoicity, his professionalism, his admiralty almost in Mass Effect 1, displaced slowly over time to Mass Effect 3, where he has a more weary sound. And I don't mean that he's fed up with what's going on. I just mean he's fighting a war down on Earth, and he's tired and worn out. And then you get this delicious contrast between him and Admiral Hackett, who almost takes on that more professional, stoic Mass Effect 1 Anderson role in Mass Effect 3.
Yeah. Yeah, and so going back to like some humanity issues, like we mentioned before with like Presley, I kind of alluded, like, to me, I've always noticed that humanity is, and they're not hiding it. I mean, if you do a first playthrough, you might miss a few things, obviously, but if you listen for it, if you look for it, if you just even eavesdrop on some things, if you notice how like humans treat aliens or how they feel that they shouldn't have to be secondary to aliens, that's rampant. It is all over. So there's a companion you can receive in Mass Effect 1 that is either beloved or reviled. There doesn't seem to be any gray area at all. Well, we're talking about Ash Williams, the companion that we get shortly after Jenkins' untimely demise.
Jenkins dies?
And that character has seen, even in my own playthroughs, had a interesting little arc. I've never really hated her flat out, but because I always like, what am I missing here? There's got to be something that I'm not connecting the dots for. But she definitely has a very, very interesting arc, and we're strictly talking about Mass Effect 1. But if you kind of go into the idea, and we don't have all this, unfortunately, this is one part that's missing in Mass Effect 1, is that you don't have the vast amount of knowledge about humanity and their dealings with aliens that you would have by endgame. You would have had all those conversations by then. But to flesh it all out, basically humanity, much of humanity really wants not only to be represented on the council, they think that they should be selected above and maybe even over the other council members in many ways. So they protested, they on specific days that were military remembrance days that were supposed to be like honorable, but they're using it to kind of push their agenda of humanity first. And that's what they're chanting: humanity first, aliens second. I mean, so when you know that going in, it's really hard for me to say flat out that Ash is, like they like the term, a space racist. I just don't see that. But What are your guys' takes on that?
She's a racist.
It's pretty horrible.
I think Ash is a representation of kind of that constant conflict between instinct and logical thought. I think Ash explains herself very well in Mass Effect 1 to say, I know how this sounds. I know it sounds hateful and bigoted, but if you think it through, any species will prioritize its own species first. That's just a natural progression of biology. And she goes on to, in later conversations, to say, listen, if you tell me to do something that I might not agree with, I will follow orders. If it elevates an alien race above humanity, I'll do it. I might not agree with it, but I recognize that it's not my call. My personal opinions on this are, we need to focus on humanity, and I fully expect that every race we're working with will focus on elevating their own race first as well. And I think when you really get that full context of why Ash sees things the way she does, she becomes a much more understandable character. There are still people who insist on, like, no, she's just a bigot, but I think she is far more reasonable and far more understanding than she's given credit for. And I think that recognition that, like, Ash consciously knows that human beings aren't inherently better or anything like that. They just need to kind of focus on themselves as a almost self-protection measure more than anything, just to ensure their own species' continued survival and progress, and moving in the direction that they need to. And I feel like that's kind of something that gets oversimplified in the way that people portray Ash.
Do you have a few minutes to talk, one-on-one?
Sure. I was hoping to get a minute of your time off the record.
I keep an open door policy. If you have any concerns, lay them on me.
All right. I know things are different aboard the Normandy, but I'm concerned about the aliens, Vicarian and Rex. With all due respect, Commander, should they have full access to the ship?
Don't mince words, Chief. What's your concern?
This is the most advanced ship in the Alliance Navy. I don't think we should give them free rein to poke around the vital systems. Engines, sensors, weapons.
You don't trust the Alliance's allies?
I'm not sure I'd call the Council races allies. We, humanity, have to learn to rely on ourselves.
Standing up for ourselves doesn't mean standing alone.
I don't think we should turn down allies. I just think we shouldn't bet everything on them staying allies. As noble as the Council members seem now, if their backs are against the wall, they'll abandon us.
I don't see that as inevitable.
Look, if you're fighting a bear and the only way for you to survive is to sick your dog on it and run, you'll do it. As much as you love your dog, it isn't human. It's not racism, not really. Members of their species will always be more important to them than humans are.
These seem like deeply held beliefs, Williams. What made you think this way?
My family's defended the Alliance since it was founded. My father, grandfather, great-grandmother, they all picked up a rifle and swore the oath of service. I guess we just tend to think of Earth's interests as our own.
It doesn't sound like you've worked with aliens before.
No, ma'am. Mainly I've been groundside, part of the surface garrison forces. I did get a rotation on a space station for training. Every Marine a rifleman, every rifleman ZG certified.
That's odd. Your record is spotless and your technical scores are exemplary. You should be serving with the fleet.
Anyway, that's why I haven't served with many aliens, Commander.
All right, I can see where your concerns are coming from, Williams. But this is a multilateral mission. You're gonna have to work with aliens, like it or not.
It won't be a problem, Commander. You say jump, I say how high. You tell me to kiss a Turian, I'll ask which cheek.
I don't think kissing Turians will be necessary.
You never know, Commander.
Dismissed, Chief.
Ma'am,
I think what you're seeing often is you're seeing the different scale. If you think of like they just pick one of the races. If you have pro-human values on a human level, so you literally have an individual who is espousing pro-human rhetoric, that will come off considerably more bigoted than human society as a whole advocating for their own interests above the Turians, above the Asari, whatever it might be. Not least just because of how it's going to be communicated. It's going to come out really quick and brutal with phrases like humanity first, alien second, or wherever it might be. I do think she is a bigot. I don't think there's really a massive conversation to be had outside of it beyond to what extent is she a bigot. And it could be a very, very small bigot. You could just say she has some views which are somewhat problematic, or you could lean the other way and say she's absolutely vile. But I also think you can see why. And I don't mean that as a defense. And I think the things I remember are a promotion being blocked because of her father or grandfather surrendering to the Turians. I think it was the Turians as part of the First Contact War. And I believe the perspective from her grandfather was they were about to lose a battle. There was no way they were going to win. And he would rather, it's a phrase I've heard used, I think it was a World War II battle somewhere, where a German officer essentially retreated and said that he would rather have 1,000 young soldiers ready to fight than 1,000 dead heroes. And I believe that's the perspective her grandfather took in that moment, was we're going to lose. I can either have a lot of dead heroes or I can have X amount of living soldiers to go home to their families after they're done. And Ashley's going to have this very positive view of this individual in her own family who saved the lives of all these soldiers, and then sees actually how he has now been treated in the outer world. And it's always going to be framed in this image of he surrendered to the aliens. And that word's going to come up a lot in her household growing up. And then when she doesn't get that promotion, it's because of what your grandfather did, ... and the aliens. And all of that being put together, there's no surprise that she's going to come out somewhat, just to take the easy word that we've been using, bigoted. There's no way she's not going to. But also every single race is doing it, and I don't mean that as a justification. It's an equally bad thing. If you look at the council, how many races are on the council to begin with? 3? There's a lot more races than that out in the world. We have, as we said, the very simple, easy examples. We've got the Volus, we've got the Elcor, we've got the Hanar, we've got the Batarians, who I guess aren't going on anytime soon. But these races, they are actively being held down by the council in an attempt to maintain the status quo so that those 3 races can maintain that superior position. And they probably wouldn't refer to what they're doing as being bigoted in any way. They would see it as just protectionist, in the same way that any major political power in our world is protectionist. The European Union is protectionist. The United States is protectionist. China is protectionist. They all are, because they would see that they are protecting something they've made that's worth protecting.
Yeah, with her specifically, like I said, there's a lot of discussion, but oftentimes, like Banana says, it gets oversimplified because there's a lot there. I mean, with the First Contact War, like you mentioned before, the grandfather did surrender, and he was the first one or the only one to ever surrender.
The
only one. And so that's where that stumbled into where the father never got promotions. She never really got promoted. And that's probably unfair to the family, right? It just is, right? They're choosing to spend their entire career in the Alliance. So I've said it before, but both Caden and Ash are Alliance first. There's no doubt about it. They're Alliance first. But Ash is the only one to say, wait a minute, this is an Alliance vessel. This is the most high-tech, futuristic spaceship in the entire fleet. And not just the human fleet, probably any Turian ship, any Solarian ship, it has a cloaking device, and yet we're having all these aliens on it. She's raising the question. She's not protesting. She doesn't protest anything. She just raises the question. She says, do we really want any potential enemy, people who could be our enemies overnight, to have immediate access to all this tech just because they're allowed to go anywhere? And that's where she just raises the concern. And then Of course, Shep can push that down, and then she just falls in line. But if you actually do listen to her story, there's a whole reason why she's being left over. And one thing I've noticed is that I'm pretty sure that Ash is guarded her entire time until she gets on the Normandy. She doesn't really have any experience with aliens. So that lack of experience can lead to some connections that don't actually exist because you've been told this about this race or that race, and she doesn't have the experience. She's very naive in that regard. But as soon as she's on the Citadel, she makes certain comments that make you think that she's totally, racist, because she doesn't know what people look like. She doesn't know what these aliens are like. And so she's like, I have no idea what a Hanar really looks like in person. And but even that protest I mentioned before, where they're saying, humanity first, she chastises them. So if you have her in your party, she gets onto them. She says, how can you think like that? That is not, really the way to get things done. She's definitely more level-headed than she gets credit for. It's just that you only get to talk to her. It's not like you're talking to every single human because you just want to, right? You're just trying to play the game.
You probably won't have her and Caden, for example, just all human gang, the three of you. You've probably got a Quarian in the party, or you've got a Turian in the party, or you've got a Krogan in your party. So she's got so many chances to say things which are possibly not bigoted, but ill-judged, just from a lack of knowing where that line is. And like you said, that unfamiliarity with the other that then breeds a sort of contempt within her that over time you can soften up by simply having her be exposed to these people, which is as transparently a political message as you could imagine. It's an incredibly straightforward analogy for the world that we live in. And the thing that you were just saying about how she simply raises the question on board about whether this would really be a good idea, and the way that she then falls into line behind you. I'm just not sure that it necessarily defends her in any way that she then falls into line behind you, because I do also think that's just you pulling rank. And she, being as alliance as she is, would have that feeling of, well, even if I hate these individuals, which I don't think she does, but even if she hated them, there would still be that moment of, well, he's the leader on board, I have to fall in.
I think Ash serves as an example of kind of where bigotry comes from at its core, and that is ignorance. It's always tied back to ignorance. So we see things through a limited perspective, and Ash sees alien races through the perspective of somebody who has been punished for the actions of her grandfather surrendering to an alien force. That association it's always a part of her life. That it's been a huge part of her life the entire time. And Legion's pointed out she's kind of been sheltered from those alien races, maybe as a result of this potential for conflict because she has this kind of reason to dislike them, or maybe just out of circumstance. And overcoming that ignorance is difficult always. And you'll see the same thing when you have that tiny little piece of information that informs your opinions of a species. It's tough to overcome. You have a single data point and you have to make a generalization based on that. Your generalization is almost always going to be wrong, but it's going to be the only thing that connects to the data you have. And I think we see other examples. Almost every Batarian we meet over the course of the Mass Effect trilogy hates Shepard because Shepard's a human. Not just any human, but Shepard is very much directly involved in why the Batarians hate humans. And it's very much not like a logical thing to say like, oh, humans are like this because we were vying for the same resources and they got them.
Yeah.
That's almost always what it comes down to. And I think the other element of that kind of ignorance informing these bigoted ideals is the perception of what is said as opposed to what is explicitly said. And you definitely see that with Ash, where she comes across as a bit bigoted for saying things that are objectively true. People are going to prioritize their own interests before considering others, and then they will prioritize others who most resemble them over others who are more different. That's just the way people are wired. And it takes a very, very strong will to overcome that kind of natural tendency.
There you go. That's what I was looking for, because I'll put a bookmark in that so that we can actually discuss anything else Mass Effect. But Ash is one to keep an eye on, because I really think that I've talked to Banana before about how like humanity has just a tendency to sometimes, even when you're wrong and you know you're wrong, you can't admit that. You can maybe to yourself, but not outwardly sometimes, especially when you've been overly vocal in the opposition. She's very malleable when it comes to things. She's very guarded, but her mindset and how she applies going forward is very decisive. So don't ever shut out Ashley is my point in all this. Just keep an eye, open for things. Have your own opinion is what I'm saying, I guess, because I see a lot of times where people especially do a playthrough and it's like, oh, you don't want that person because they're a space racist. Play the game.
And I think that is such a weird exact example of what I just said, where it's people get a single data point and they latch onto that. They latch onto the generalization that they've made from that. So they get a data point where Ash says, are we sure we want Turians and Asari and Quarians on the ship? And they latch onto that and they're like, oh, she's a racist. And then she's always a racist. They never recognize that she's making the effort to understand other races. They never recognize that she has legitimate concerns that are being twisted into illegitimate concerns that are portrayed as racism. And I think it's very funny that the example they use to showcase that learning more always leads to kind of the elimination of these problematic convictions is overlooked by so many people because they refuse to reconsider their initial convictions.
Right. It's a very inward thought process that I think the story of Mass Effect really has an effect. Once you start diving in a little bit deeper, you're like, maybe you're a victim of your own assessment there. Is there any one particular companion you feel is like, I'm going to have this person with me regardless? It doesn't matter what my class or background is.
I seem to recall almost always having Rex with me. I think purely for that slightly tanky feel. And I used to find that I couldn't necessarily guarantee that my folks were going to remain in cover. They weren't necessarily going to be as protective of themselves.
They won't remain in cover.
There you go. So having possibly Liara and Tali, for example, together often felt a bit too very much glass cannon. They can hit like mother flippers. But I felt having that just sturdiness that Rex provided you. Almost always I would have him on board. And I am remembering correctly that he has some biotic power, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was going to say. Because I think you have to have a biotic. You have to. And for me, he always offered that wonderful balance between just pure strength, pure staying power, and having the biotic abilities too. So for me, Rex would be as close to an ever-present as you could have, except for Shepard.
I think for me, and Legion and I have talked about this, like we've replayed the game a lot, and we've kind of fallen into the habit of replaying the game on insanity. So we play on the hardest difficulty we can. And I think on that difficulty, if you're just getting used to it, Rex is exactly that. You almost need him for just the longevity that he presents. But once you kind of develop that comfort level to overcome the game difficulty, regardless of your composition, for me, Tali is always on the team. And I don't think it's a lore thing. I don't think it's a mechanics thing. I just really like Tali. And I think that's really all it comes down to is just like, I want to hang out with Tali more.
Oh, hello. Shepard.
Are you okay?
I don't know. Your ship is amazing, and your crew's been really great to me, especially your chief engineer. But I just sort of feel out of place. The Normandy runs so smooth it feels like we're not even moving, and the engines are so quiet. How do you sleep at night?
The silence wakes you up?
Back on the flotilla, the last thing you want to hear is silence. It means an engine's died or an air filter shut down. I guess you don't have to worry about that here. But old habits die hard. But it's more than just the silence. This ship feels so empty. It's like half the crew is missing. Back home, I couldn't wait to go on my pilgrimage. I couldn't wait to get away from the crowds. Now that I'm out here, I kind of miss them.
Sometimes we don't appreciate what we have till it's gone.
That's true. I'm starting to wonder if that's what the pilgrimage is really about. It's given me a whole new perspective on my people and our culture. You know, there's always a few who go on their pilgrimages and never return. I always assumed something bad happened to them, but maybe they just wanted a different life.
You do plan to return to the migrant fleet, right?
I could never abandon my people, Shepard. I will go back eventually, but we have to stop Saren first. Otherwise, I might not have a home to go back to.
I should go.
See you later.
I know I just got done talking
Space
about
racist?
Yeah, space racist. Yeah, because you mentioned like the tank, and there's nobody tankier than Ash in the whole game, the whole series, actually, because she's just a pure soldier. That's all she is. So really, you don't need to put all those extra points in decryption or whatever else she comes along with. You can put it all into soldier, all into physical toughness. You don't need her to do any of her abilities. So if you're playing on Insanity and you need somebody to be a meat shield, just bring Ash everywhere. But if I'm going for story and lore, yeah, it's Tali. I'm always bringing Tali. Tally's a great conversationalist. She has great stories behind her. She's immediately versatile no matter what you do. So because Mass Effect 1 is one of those games where if anybody in your party has like a decryption skill level, you don't have to, as the person operating that whatever that you're trying to get open. It's just that they're in your party, so you have the skill level necessary. So you don't.
That's something I wish they would do in Baldur's Gate.
Yeah.
Right.
So if I'm like, say, an engineer, and I'm always going to have Tally with me, who's also an engineer, I can put my points somewhere else and let her be my decryption expert or whatever. So it's really versatile in that regard. I mean, and that's just one example, of course, but I really think Tally's the way to go. But I think a lot of people have gravitated, rightly so. There's nothing wrong with this decision, but I think a lot of people have gravitated toward Garrus. Garrus is an immediately likable character, and he's also very versatile because he is a Sentinel. So
he's also just kind of your boy, isn't he? All the way through the series, Garrus is the ride or die. Garrus is your right-hand man the entire way. I was just going to say the detail, I think, and it's gone by memory, for why I would have had Rex rather than Ashley. I think it was 2 spells. One was Barrier. I think Rex has Barrier and Ashley
Rex
doesn't.
does have Barrier, yes.
Yeah, and Stasis.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure he's got that. I think it was those two and how useful Stasis in particular is for crowd control that would have had me go for him rather than her. So you'd have most of the tankiness, not quite as much as Ashley. I think she's got more HP. Mm-hmm. But you do just have that ability to control your opponents on the battlefield. Oh, and throw as well the biotic power.
I think it's funny that the reason you've highlighted keeping Rex in your team is something Legion and I both have talked about not liking.
Really?
We don't like Stasis.
Yeah. It's crowd control for sure. But you can't damage them in their stasis.
It's tactically viable.
Mm-hmm.
I'd much rather shoot them in the face.
I think
which
it's,
obviously not always an option, but
It's like, I think for me, it's the sort of Divinity Original Sin or the XCOM thing of ultimately every battle is going to be decided by how many turns you have and how many turns your opponents have. So any chance that you can have, yeah, this is real time, but any chance you can have to reduce your opponent's turns, even if you can't hurt that person. I'm sure that there's the mission on the planet where you rescue Liara, where the Krogan turns up, the Krogan Battlemaster. I seem to remember Stasis really, without that, me not getting out.
It's
I think
a
it was that
very,
one.
very helpful one in that one because, and that's an issue I've had with Mass Effect and games in general, where a cutscene denies you the opportunity to play the game until you've adopted a disadvantage. And in that scene, you stand there and wait for him to basically place his troops around you, and you have a conversation with him. And I love that one of the options is, can we just shoot this guy? And because as a player, I'm sitting there going, why haven't we shot him yet? It's a very funny situation where you're like, because that fight is difficult, especially if it's, the first direction you go. You don't go to Ferris, you don't go to New Viria, you go to get Liara. It's not it's not an easy fight. And then they're like, just let him get set up first. Like, hold on, we need him to be in position and now you can fight. Like, no.
Yeah, it's not easy. And
Absolutely.
that's actually where you meet a Krogan Battlemaster, which are incredibly rare in the Mass Effect universe.
Yeah.
You won't know this, of course, because you're just, if you're new to the series, but they're incredibly rare. And that's your first, like, real boss battle, really. So.
Oh, and it feels like it. That this is someone worth noting, even though they don't have a name. It's worth noting who this individual is and their strength, because they are outlandishly strong. And if you play that on, like you say, Insanity, you can take 2 or 3 attempts to even be able to start the fight, because you will get out of the conversation and just instantly boom, 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 reload.
Yeah. And I think that's an interesting one because it's just like, it's him with 3 Geth. You don't get other Krogans. It's just one Krogan Battlemaster, and it's a problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, there's also in that scene is really that's a unique scene because when you do get Liara, again, I'm going to avoid major spoilers here or anything, but Liara doesn't know you from anybody, right? You don't know Liara really, but you're standing your ground. If you have the conversation where you say no, you're going to basically have to go through us to get her. Liara actually makes a little look at you like, who is this? But at the same time, I'm not ungrateful. It's the oddest look in a cinematic that says everything with just that little look. And of course, you don't know or anything, but as you do the playthroughs over and over, you catch that. And it's just a little subtle look that they didn't have to, like they could have just had a little stoic Liara looking straight forward or whatever, but she actually does make a little look. And it's just good storytelling.
Surrender. Or don't. That would be more fun.
There a reason you're in my way?
The same reason you're here. The Asari. Thanks for getting rid of those energy fields for us. Hand the doctor over.
Whatever it is you want, you are not getting it from me.
She'll stay with us, thanks.
Not an option. Saren wants her, and he always gets what he wants. Kill them. Spare the Asari if you can. If not, doesn't matter.
Well, surprise, surprise. We had enough content to cover Mass Effect in multiple episodes, so join us next time where the Gamer's Advocate discusses Mass Effect 1.